Hello, everyone. Trump did his State of the Union speech last night, so I wanted to give my response to that. Um, just a disclaimer, I guess. I did not watch the whole thing. I watched the first hour, and I wrote enough notes that I felt like I had enough to make a video on. Otherwise, I could probably talk about it for an hour or 2 hours. I'll probably go back and watch more of it. But yeah, I felt like I had enough topics to discuss just from the first hour. So my, general takeaway from the whole thing is basically, this is not new for Trump, but he's just basically, a showman and an entertainer, and he's just basically reading off cue cards. You might as well say he's very scripted. Um, like this used to be like the big scandal. I would say, like, if it looked like you were like so on script that you were practically like robotic, then like that's like so bad. But now with how crazy Trump is, um, basically like sticking like to the script verbatim is basically like that passes as sane, and and people are happy with that as opposed to Trump shooting from the hip. Um, but he's just basically like he just points out things. He's like, oh, I brought this person, I brought that person, and they're gonna prove my point because they're here. So it's anybody can do that. Anyone can be like, hey, this person here is proving my point. Like, and it's all this anecdotal stuff, of course, all the time. So he mentions Puerto Rico, the fallout with that, and the California wildfires, and he has people there, to present, and everyone stands and claps and all that. But it really got under my skin because he's pointing out these disasters, the hurricane that hit Puerto Rico, the wildfires that hit California. He's pointing out these things, but he's a climate denier. He's not in favor of putting in policies that are going to um, combat climate change, and he's in denial of the reality. I mean, and it goes, you know, just beyond any bounds of respectability. I mean, the guy Trump said recently that the ice caps are at record levels. So he's trying to say that, oh yeah, the ice caps, they're actually more than they ever were. And I know this because, I don't know, science. But no, that's not right. And NASA came out and said, no, that's not correct. Um, and Puerto Rico is not okay. Like if you watch the speech, you might get the impression that like we're dealing with Puerto Rico officially, but it's not. That's not the case. We're looking at a situation where a lot of the country still doesn't have power. FEMA is going to stop giving food and water. Um, and the efforts that are going into it, it's just not enough. It's just a half-assed job, basically. And keep it real. I think Trump and the Republicans just don't particularly care about Puerto Rico. It's not high on their priority list, so they're not going to put much effort into trying to fix it. Um, if it was, say, a red state, maybe you'd have a different story. Um, so he bragged about how unemployment is down and the economy is booming and all of this, but the truth of the matter is that we're in a bubble. Okay, all the growth that you're seeing now, it's an illusion. Okay, and this is repeated times in history. I've how many videos have I done where I mention this? But I'm going to do it again because it needs to be said that history repeats itself. You have the Roaring Twenties and basically just deregulation, and you had a soaring economy, and then you had the Great Depression follow it. You had the 80s and Reaganomics, same thing, cutting taxes, deregulation, all that, and then towards the end of the Reagan administration, you had a crash in the economy that was the biggest at the time since the Depression. And then in 2008, under Bush, you had the Great Recession, which actually outdid what happened in the 80s. It was even worse. And same deal, cutting taxes and deregulation. These periods in our history all share those far right policies. So it's not just a coincidence that we're seeing these things. I mean, it's just a house of cards. The elite know that they're really just playing Monopoly here. It's all built upon how good the economy is doing at the present moment. And the fact of the matter is, when you have income inequality rising in this country, it's the growth that you're seeing is only really temporary because people are not really going to be spending money in the economy if they can't afford to. So really, this idea of trickle down. You're going to give money to the wealthy and it's going to trickle down to the middle class. Well, there's plenty of ways that you can just flat out give money to the middle class. Like instead of like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this like maneuver, right? I'm going to do this bank shot where it's going to, like really, it's going to go to the middle class once I give it to the rich. No, you could raise the wage to a livable wage. It's a little far out there in left field, I guess, but you could do a universal basic income. That's one example. But there's plenty of ways that you can get more money to the middle class. And despite the propaganda, when you raise the minimum wage, you're not seeing, job loss or any of these things. When you look at places that have actually raised the minimum wage, it doesn't happen. Like with net neutrality, as one example, the government is going to have less power to enforce fairness on the internet, and that's by design. The FCC decided we're going to step out, and Ajit Pai, who's the head of the FCC, worked for Verizon. So you think that's a coincidence that he's looking out for their interests right now? It's all just a way for private companies to flourish more and more, because that's the right-wing dogma. If you let the market, if you release the beast of the free market, as they would say, then everything's just going to get better and better. But that we've not seen that. As a matter of fact, it hasn't been as bad as it is before. Like, I feel like Trump is putting the corrupt system that we already have on steroids. So I'm really worried, down the line about what could happen. It could be a total disaster, in my opinion. I mean, we have to wait and see. I'm not gonna, draw a line in the sand to a degree, I am gonna say yes. The bubble will eventually burst. I think the question is just how bad it's going to be. So, the point I'm making is if we've never seen this level of just brazen corruption before, like it's just not going to end well. And like I was saying before, Trump bragged about all these anecdotal examples of companies raising their wages because they have lower taxes now. But like these things just basically, like, you can find examples of companies letting people go too. Career, the air conditioning company, they supposedly made a deal with Trump when he first got into office, and they're letting go thousands of jobs. So what's all that about? So if you find a company that's raising their wages or something, like, is it going to matter if you have another company that's doing the opposite? It's like parsing out these specific examples to prove the economy is doing well. It's not, like I say, it's an illusion right now. It's all built around, oh, well, the elite are doing well, so that means the majority of American people are doing well. Well, that's not true. Then we go to foreign policy. Of course, talked about how the U.S. is strong right now. The dwindling of ISIS. And this is, largely incorrectly accredited to the U.S. the people that are fighting ISIS on the ground mostly are the Kurds, the Syrian army, um, and Iran. Like they're militias more or less that are backed by Iran, I think. And you know, we've decided to stay in Iran. I'm sorry, not Iran, Syria indefinitely because we're going after Assad now. I talked about this before. We basically ISIS is gone. So what is our reasoning for staying in Syria? Well, there's Assad, and he's kind of propped up by Russia and Iran, more or less, because like Assad is going to be their stronghold in that region. So let's go after him. Why? I don't know. Is that of national security interest? Who cares? As long as we get to keep the war machine moving. But that aside, we are killing more civilians under Trump. Okay, we've raised the number of drone strikes from what Obama had, which was already horrible. We've raised it 432%, and there was a report done by UK-based watchdog called Air Wars, and they started in 2014, and basically they found that Trump has been killing more civilians since they started monitoring what Obama was doing in 2014. So in 2 years, Trump killed. I'm messing this up. Damn it. Trump killed in his first year more than Obama did in 2 years. So that tells you right there, and these are civilian casualties. It shows you that it's all the same system on steroids. Like I say, it's this negligence that is kind of just being encouraged now, I would say, because it's like basically the U.S. is right no matter what. We can do whatever we want. We're bombing 8 different countries right now. It used to be 7, but now we've entered Niger under Trump. So, and I would just make the point again, like we spend countless tax dollars on these wars overseas for what national security purpose, I would love to know. And does it really keep us safe? I really don't think it does. It might even do the opposite. We might be creating more terrorists by killing this level of civilians. But at the same time, our infrastructure is crumbling. Flint doesn't have clean water, and you have Puerto Rico to deal with. You have so many problems that are domestic, and they aren't dealt with. Then we go to healthcare. Trump bragged about repealing the individual mandate, which, the uninsured rate rose under Trump by 1.3%. Okay? 3.2 million people lost their health care. So that's 3.2 million more than whatever the total number is. And the individual mandate being repealed, it's just going to get worse. It's not going to get better because of that. I mean, Trump can try and shit talk Obamacare all he wants, but Trump is making it worse. The premiums are still going up. Obamacare is being gutted at every turn. So I don't even know exactly what the right wing position is on healthcare at this point. They don't have really a plan of their own. They're just trying to go after Obamacare. But it's getting worse. So that's all I pretty much want to say on that. Trump went full snowflake and did this pontificating about, how it's like a virtue by itself to stand for the anthem, and we have in God we trust, above the House of Congress or wherever he made the speech, and we're restoring religious freedom right now, and I don't know exactly what he means by that, but I saw a lot of Betsy DeVos there, and I would have to say maybe have something to do with, this basically unabashed support of charter schools, which this goes back to the larger privatization of things, in my opinion, but it's a little bit more sinister because you have charter schools that are getting public funds, and they aren't held as accountable as other schools. This is the problem with school choice, is that you're basically giving tax dollars to schools that don't have to necessarily teach the same things. They could be, even religious schools. And this is, they skirt the laws, basically, these places. I've looked into it. And so there's a little bit of nefarious aspects going on there. But the point is, Trump and DeVos are on their side. So that's not getting any better. You're gonna have more of these places probably receive leniency from the government, and we're supposed to have a separation of church and state. So, I'm sorry, if you're a school that's teaching religious dogma, I don't think you should receive public funds. That's about as simple as I can make it, because you're not teaching science then. If you're teaching a religious dogma in a classroom setting, that you're doing a disservice to those kids. So that's all I'll say about that. Trump, he just doesn't really understand our values. I mean, going back to the standing for the anthem thing and in God we trust, we have a separation of church and state, and not standing for the anthem. He's doing a jab at the NFL there. We're supposed to have free speech in this country. We're supposed to have the right to express ourselves in whatever way we see fit, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. So, and if the NFL's fine with it, they're a private organization. If they wanted to fire a player for not standing for the anthem, they're within their right to do that. But that hasn't really happened yet. And Colin Kaepernick, he's basically out of a job, so it's not like he's doing, hunky-dory right now. But, the point is, if they're okay with it, then that's where the bar stops. At that point, it becomes completely legitimate. And he's making it look like they don't understand American values, when really it's the other way around. You have to be able to let people express themselves in the ways that are in accordance with the law, and there's nothing wrong with doing a protest like that. It's perfectly within the First Amendment rights, in my opinion. So like I was saying, he's basically just keeping the same corrupt system in place. You heard all this talk about when he was campaigning that he's like this anti-establishment candidate, he's going to drain the swamp, right? Well, there's just countless examples of why this is not true. He put in Goldman Sachs officials in his administration. He put in the president of Goldman Sachs, Gary Cohn, and Steve Mnuchin too. And meanwhile, when he was campaigning, he attacked Hillary Clinton and Ted Cruz for being too buddy-buddy with Wall Street. And then he puts these people in high level positions in his administration. Look at Scott Pruitt in the EPA. They're now banning scientific advisors, basically, and they're suing the EPA over this. So, good on them. But the EPA, and what Scott Pruitt is doing, is he's basically saying, we're going to work with the oil industry now to basically regulate them. That's just great. Would you like to have cops meet up with robbers and be like, we're going to discuss how we're going to enforce the law when it comes to you? No, if that ever happened, we'd be like, yeah, that's corruption and you shouldn't do that. You can't be buddy with the people that you're trying to enforce. You have to be objective, and when you have these interpersonal relationships like that, it's not going to work the same way. It's just not. And like I was saying earlier, Trump wants to privatize the infrastructure. He's bragged about that in the speech. He wants to, rebuild our roads and all these things, but at the end of the day, Goldman Sachs is going to own it. We're not going to have that, and it is important because you're giving more power to Goldman Sachs. You're making them grow more powerful when I, I'm sorry, I think we need to have a stronger government. I'm not necessarily talking about increasing the size of government, but I think we need a stronger government. We need a government that's for the people and by the people. Um, and so, yeah, this is not draining the swamp. It's the opposite. He's making the swamp even swampier than it was before. So I guess the last thing I'll talk about is immigration. And Trump did his classic fear mongering. I mean, he points out anecdotal stuff where someone gets killed, and then he's like, "Yeah, there's the family or whatever. Let them stand up." Um, and he demands respect for ICE agents, the people who go out and enforce immigration. But this is bigotry and xenophobia. It's based on if you're just like the other, then that's bad enough. Um, it's like saying that there's a few rotten apples, so we gotta take away the whole barrel. Because what happens is, Obama already broke the record for deportations under his administration, and Trump is actually cracking down even harder. And what's happening is you have people, families that are being broken up, and they haven't done anything. A guy was taking his kids to school, and he got busted by ICE agents. Like that. That's not moral. It's not. It shouldn't be a priority to break up families that aren't doing anything to harm anyone. If you want to talk about violent illegal immigrants, then maybe yeah, of course, I would have that conversation. Um, but if your only crime is coming into this country illegally, then you need to read up on your facts because that is not even a felony. That's a misdemeanor. So you know, I'm totally for giving the dreamers a pathway to citizenship. We should have amnesty in this country for people that are just here to make a living and start a new life. Um, and I think probably the most important point is if you really wanted to cut down on violence from illegal immigrants, then you would end the drug war. You would create a situation where you have less violent people coming across the border, and you shrink the cartels by you could start by legalizing marijuana or at least decriminalizing it, I guess. But legalization would really do the trick because then there'd be like no illegal trade for marijuana really anymore. Um, if you have a wall, there's ways that things get around walls. This underground market for the drug cartels. I mean, these people are tied with illegal immigrants as a whole. Like this is because they have the most power. So if you want to get across the country, it's oftentimes you get mixed up with these people. So they have tunnels that go underground. Sometimes illegal immigrants come by plane. What happens is they come by a visa and then they overstay their visa and then that's it. They're in the country already. But yeah, the main takeaway is if you did the progressive policy, which is ending the drug war, it would help prevent more violence on the border. And this is in alignment with what the American people want. But of course, Trump has no real interest in fighting for what the American people want, as he's shown with his numerous different policies that he's passed. You could look at the bill that allows internet companies to sell your metadata that had a 6% approval rating. Wow, that's really topping the bill there. His tax plan, I don't even know the approval rating for that, but it was definitely a low number, like maybe 30%. So like, this idea that Trump is fighting for the little man is just it's not borne out by the facts.